And we are live. Welcome. This is the Free Culture Sports Show, episode 16 of this season. We're continuing talking about our March Madness extravaganza, although we're no longer in March. So I guess we have to call it April Madness now. Today is April the 4th. The tournament final is on April the 6th. So I guess is the Final Four not part of March Madness? I would think that the madness is mostly the first weekend. That's the real madness, is the first weekend. After that, the real tournament starts, and we just start having a basketball tournament. But they'll probably still call it March Madness, even though it's April 4th today and April 6th when the tournament, the finale is. But today's the day of the Final Four games. I'm just curious this season what happened to all of the upsets, all of the madness that was supposed to happen with these tournaments. You know, what happened to number one seeds getting knocked off? Every year we seem to enter the tournament with the number one seeds thinking those are the top four teams, but, most of the time a couple of them lose along the path. We had one lose along the way this time at Villanova. But let me just give you some history on kind of why this Final Four is just so unique and so bizarre. Only three other times since, I guess, 1979 when it expanded to 40 teams, but especially since it expanded to 64 teams in the mid-'80s. Only three times has three number one seeds made the Final Four. That was in 1993, 1997, and 1999. It hasn't happened in 16 years. In 2008 was the only year since the expansion to 40 teams in 1979 that the Final Four was all number one seeds. So that's only happened once. We've only had three times with three number one seeds. There's been a lot with two number one seeds. But let's look at just number one seeds. Usually, a couple make it, but not a lot. Not all of them, and usually not three of them. In 2011, the highest seed to reach the Final Four was a 3 seed. This was UConn. We're going to talk about this tournament towards the end of the show. But the other seeds in the Final Four that year were a 4, an 8, and an 11. Is this year more of an anomaly, or was that year more of an anomaly? Probably that year, but we're going to talk about that later on in the show. Three times, not a single number one seed has made the Final Four. 2011, as we already mentioned, but also in 1980, when the field wasn't quite 64 teams, and 2006. So three times, not a single number one seed has made it. Only 6 times since it's expanded to 64 teams in, I think, 1985, but I wasn't born yet, so I'd have to go back and check. Has expanded to 64 teams. Only 6 times have 2 number one seeds met in the championship game. This year, we are ensured at least 1 number one seed. At least Wisconsin or Kentucky will make it. And if Duke gets past Michigan State, which I'm anticipating that they are, it'll happen this year too. More just anomalies. The only one other 7 seed since 1979 has made the Final Four, and that was Virginia in 1984. And if I'm correct that the expansion happened in 1985, that means that no number 7 seed has made the Final Four since the expansion to 64 teams. So we've got a number 7 seed. We've got 3 number 1 seeds. Both seem to be pretty rare events. So is this year just an anomaly, or is this could we have predicted this to happen? Some people did. Some people predicted the Final Four to be exactly these 4 teams, despite history. And I think a lot of the times when it comes to the NCAA tournament, we get a little bit too caught up in some history behind it. But interesting things, do happen and do line up with, the past. As I stated last week, I think that 6 of the top 6 to 8 teams in the nation, the top 8 6, 8, 7 teams in the nation were just much, much better than the rest of the teams, which is usually not the case. If you go back and look at this season, there just weren't that many upsets. Kentucky was never upset. Wisconsin was beat by Duke and by Rutgers, but Kaminsky and some other players were out that game. Arizona, I'd have to go back and look, but they lost a total of 3 games, all on the road, all by like a combined 9 or 11 points. I could keep going on, but I can only hold so many numbers in my head at a time. But those top like 5 to 8 teams were just much, much better than everybody else in the field. And maybe that's why we got the 3 number 1 seeds coming that made the Final Four. I don't think there was a top team in Villanova's region, maybe outside of Villanova themselves, and that's why it paved the way for a lower team to make the Final Four, Michigan State. So there were 8 teams that entered the tournament with 4 losses or fewer. I'd have to go back and look, each year, year by year, but that seems like an unusually high number to have 8 teams with 4 losses or fewer. However, a number 2 seed Kansas and a number 3 seed Iowa State both had 8 losses, double the 4 that the 4 fewer. Number 3 Oklahoma had 10 losses, and a number 4 seed UNC had 11 losses. So the top teams had just didn't lose, and the immediately drop off to the 2s and the 3s had a lot more losses. There's 2 reasons why they could have had 4 losses or fewer, and that's if they were actually just a really good team, or if they were just a pretty okay team in a pretty weaker conference. So we're going to break down the next the top 15 teams out of the AP Top 25 when the tournament started, and Michigan State, who was not in the top 15 of the AP poll. They were number 23. So starting with number 1, Kentucky, 34-0, pretty good conference. They were the best team in the conference, best team in the nation all year, still undefeated. So just the best team, can't really learn anything from that. Villanova, 32-2, pretty weak conference. Their record is probably due to the weak conference, not that they're just a good team. They have to be a good team in order to win 32 games, but are they one of the best teams? No, because we couldn't tell due to them playing in a weak conference. Number 3, Wisconsin, 31-3. Tough conference in the Big Ten, and they were a really good team in the Big Ten. Again, they lost that Duke game. They lost to Rutgers when Kaminsky was out, as well as some other players, and I can't remember what their 3rd loss was, but I think it was around the same time as that Rutgers game. When they were healthy, they just didn't lose in conference. They were battle-tested and ready to go. Number 4, Duke, 29-4, very tough conference in the ACC. They were a good team. 2 of their losses came back-to-back against NC State and Miami. NC State made the tournament. Miami was NIT finalist that lost to Stanford. But really good team in Duke. I think they just had a week or 2 where they kind of lost themselves. Duke is. We're going to come back to Duke once we talk about their this weekend, but I was kind of upset that they were a number 1 seed, but playing in the conference that they did, having the record that they did, I can forgive it. Number 5, Arizona, 31-3. We talked about them. The Pac-12 was a pretty good conference this year. Best team in they were the best team in the conference by far. It wasn't even close. Excuse me. Next, we had Virginia, 29-3, best record in the ACC, which is probably the best conference and one of the best conferences this year. Their playing style will win games in the season, but in the tournament, you've got to be able to score against some teams that can play defense against you. And Michigan State out Virginia this year. They just weren't good enough. Number 7, Gonzaga, 32-2. Now they play in a weaker conference, but they were a really good team. Their record was due to having a weaker conference. If they played in like the ACC or even the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, they probably would have lost a few more games. But they were going to be a really good team no matter what conference they were in. I just think that their record was a little bit skewed due to the weak conference. Number 8, Notre Dame, 29-5. Really good conference, good team. But the 5 losses, they were just outside of that 4-loss threshold. Sped through the ACC tournament, beat UNC, beat Duke. I think they were a much better team at the end of the year. I don't know. Only 5 losses. I think they had some suspensions and some health issues throughout the season. Maybe that's why they lost 5. I would consider them one of the top teams in the nation this year, even though they had the 5 losses. Moving on, number 9, Iowa State. That's our first team that had 8 losses. I had high hopes for the Big 12, but 8 losses. I mean, that's telling me that team doesn't really know how to win consistently or win close games, or they'd lose games that they were supposed to win. 8 losses. Kansas also had 8 losses, 26-8. Same thing. I mean, they're in the same conference. They had high hopes for them. I thought that all of these teams beating up on each other was a good thing. Turns out, because one team couldn't establish themselves, it made the conference look really good, but the teams weren't very good. Number 11, Northern Iowa, 30-3, definitely a weaker conference. I had them pegged as one of the best, a really good team. I had them in the Elite 8, losing to Virginia. I should not have had Virginia that far, but that's my own mistake. I think Northern Iowa would have made it, but Louisville and Pitino just too much against them. Sometimes coaches and just battle-tested teams will beat better teams in the tournament. I think Northern Iowa was a really good team, even though they played in a weaker conference. Maryland, 27-6, tougher conference. They only had one major ball handler, though, and that loss of the ball handler due to head injury, concussion, or whatever it was in that game, I was flipping back and forth and just knew he was out. That seemed to really hurt Maryland in that game. So 27-6, even though they were ranked 12th in the nation, maybe a little bit their results were a little bit skewed due to injury. But 6 losses in the Big Ten, that's pretty good. Oklahoma, 22-10. Again, 10 losses. 2 more losses than Iowa State and Kansas. So could they be considered that good of a team? Maybe they're an okay team, but 22-10, I don't care who your competition is. That's telling me you don't know how to win that often. You're winning 2 out of 3 games, and when you get in the tournament, if you win 2 out of 3 games, you're going home before the Elite 8. Wichita State, 28-4, again at a weaker conference, but still a good team. The conference is getting a lot better. But I think it's going to get top-heavy before the whole conference picks up. So we're going to have some records that are skewed. We're going to have to look more at individual matchups within that conference to see who's better teams. But they need to start playing teams outside of their conference later on in the season to kind of see, okay, how good is this conference really going to be? Then number 15 was North Carolina, 24-11. I don't know how you have 11 losses and you're ranked 15th in the nation. I'm a UNC fan, but they're the same as Oklahoma. I mean, winning 2 out of every 3 games. They won their first 2 in the tournament and then lost their 3rd one. I mean, you're not going to be expected to move on against really good teams if you're only winning 2 out of 3 games. And then Michigan State, their record does not matter. They were ranked 23rd in the nation. You just don't bet against Tom Izzo in the NCAA tournament. unless he's going up against a great team, and there just weren't any in that region. So should, in hindsight, of course, he picked Michigan State because they made it out of the field. In hindsight, should I have picked them from the beginning? I don't know. I had more hopes for Virginia because of the ACC. I don't like either playing style, but I should have gone with the better coach because its time is up. So the teams that won most of their conference games, only had 3-4 losses or fewer, and they were in good conferences, show you that they're going to be able to win games in the tournament. If you're from a weaker conference, obviously you're not as battle-tested and you're not as ready to go up against the tough teams in the tournament. And those with the worst records, the 8 losses, the 10 losses, the 11 losses, those teams just aren't winners. Yes, they have a winning record by far, but you can't expect to get in a close game and win against a top team if they've won all of their close games and you've won half of your close games. I mean, yes, you might squeak out 1 or 2, but to expect you to make it to the final in the Final Four or even the championship is just too great of expectations. So let's compare this tournament to the 2011 tournament. Again, that was the year where the Final Four was number 3 UConn, a number 4 seed Kentucky, number 8 seed Butler, and number 11 seed VCU. Your number 1 seeds that tournament, of course, all were knocked out. 32-2 Ohio State, 30-4 Duke, 32-2 Kansas, 27-5 Pittsburgh. Your number 2 seeds were UNC, 26-7, San Diego State, 32-2, Notre Dame, 26-6, and Florida, 26-7. Now, immediately you can see that these teams have a lot more losses than the teams this season. Kansas only had 2. Ohio State only had 2. Duke had the same number of losses as they do this year, and San Diego State was 32-2. Well, of course, we don't have any undefeated team. We've got number 2 seeds with 7 losses, 6 losses. We have a number 1 seed with 5 losses. I mean, there was not a clear pick for that 4th number 1 seed. A lot of people thought San Diego State at 32-2 should have gotten it, but they just played in a weaker conference. So now let's look at how those teams got there to their 32-2. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at how their conference did in the big dance, in the tournament itself. So Ohio State being in the Big Ten, and they are the only team in the Big Ten out of this group. The Big Ten had 7 teams that season, and they went a combined 7-7 in the tournament. None of them made the Elite 8, and only 2 made the Sweet 16. So no great teams. Conference had a down year in the big dance. So probably the teams just weren't that good that year. Credit for Ohio State for beating all of them, but not a great team due to not having the tougher conference. The ACC only had 4 teams make the tournament that year. Now, one was UNC at a number 2, and one was Duke at a number 1 seed. They went a combined 8-4. Had 3 teams in the Sweet 16, only 1 in the Elite 8, and none made the Final Four. So only 4 teams in the field, only 1 in the Elite 8, 3 in the Sweet 16. Should have performed better. Duke or UNC probably should have performed better. But again, their record showed that they weren't a great team. They were going to lose. They were probably going to lose a game. Kansas, 32-2 out of the Big 12. Big 12 had 5 teams make the field, went 5-5 for a 500 record, just like the Big 10. 3 teams made the round of 32. Only 1 out of the 5 made the Sweet 16. That same team made the Elite 8 before losing in the Elite 8. That could have been Kansas. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But, again, when your conference only has 1 team in the Sweet 16 out of 5, and you went 32-2, maybe it was you, but that just means that the rest of your conference wasn't that great. Pittsburgh came out of the Big East. Now, the winner that year was UConn, who went 6-0 in the tournament. So their record for the Big East was 13-10. But if you take UConn out, they were 7-10. If you continue to take UConn out, there were 10 teams out of the Big East, 11 if you count UConn. 7 made the round of 32, 7 out of the 11. Only 2 out of those 7 made the Sweet 16. And again, one of those was UConn. So only one team out of 10 in the Big East made the Sweet 16 outside of UConn, and none of them made the Elite Eight. So out of 10 teams, 1 made the Sweet 16 and none made the Elite Eight. So UConn just had a year. You know, they were just really good that year in the tournament, and Kemba Walker led them. I think that was the year Kemba Walker didn't lose a game on a neutral court. Like they won Maui. They won the Big East tournament. They won the NCAA tournament. They just didn't lose a game. Now, in conference, they lost a lot of games. That's why they were number 3 seed. But something about Kemba Walker just wanting to win games when they counted. You know, what can you say about that? San Diego State, 32-2. You know, weaker conference. I don't really have to say much about that. I don't think any team from their conference made the Elite Eight. Can't really say much about that. And then the SEC for Florida, the SEC had 5 teams make the field, going 7-5, had 2 reach the Elite Eight, and then Kentucky made the Final 4. So the SEC was probably one of the better better conferences, but Florida went 26-7, had the 7 losses, weren't a great team, and so, you know, they just didn't know how to win all the games. You know, so we're comparing this season where the top teams came from very tough conferences, won most of their games in their very tough conferences, and so when they get to the big dance and they're ready to play, you know, ready to play close games, they've won their close games. They've won against tough teams in close games. In 2011 and other years, you'll get number 1 seeds that come from a weaker conference, maybe an overrated conference. They don't know how to win all of their games. They've lost close games to weaker teams. And that's what, you know, happened to Pittsburgh that year, 27-5. UNC was 26-7. If you are a great team ready to make the run, you're not going to have a record that poor. And you know, especially if you run up against another great team. This year with Wisconsin and Arizona, we had 2 really good teams. Kentucky and Notre Dame, 2 really good teams. Duke and Gonzaga, 2 really good teams. I mean, the better team won those games, each one of those games, because all of them were battle tested throughout the whole season, won games in the season, refused to lose, and, you know, kept going. Villanova, not battle tested. That's why they lost. No, Virginia, their style just wasn't very good. So throw out Villanova, throw out Virginia. Who are you going to pick? Probably Michigan State. Maybe Louisville with their situation this year, but they still got Rick Pitino. They still won their games. Maybe Northern Iowa if you want to take a risky pick on a weaker conference. You know, maybe NC State, who beat Villanova. Some people were saying, oh, they're going to the Final Four. So, you know, Oklahoma, some people had, but again, the 10 losses, a number 3 seed with 10 losses, that just is like, head scratcher. So is there a formula for success? I think so. You have to look at how tough the conference is, how well they performed in a tougher conference. But looking at how tough the conference is may be relative, and we can't tell that until after the NCAA tournament. So let's move on to tonight's game. So I talked too much about the 2011 tournament. That was, you know, 4 years ago. To tonight's games, it's no surprise who I'm cheering for. Go Big Blue. They should beat Wisconsin, but, you know, this matchup is going to be one of the best matchups to watch. Now, if UK and Duke end up playing in the final, I think that'll be historic. But this game could be fantastic. Um, you have the most efficient offensive team in Wisconsin versus the most efficient defensive team in Kentucky. Now, Kentucky has stepped it up against top competition all year, blowing out Kansas, squeaking past Notre Dame, but blowing out West Virginia. Anytime somebody has really been like, oh, UK is going to lose, and they've had time to prepare, they've stepped it up and they've done what needed to be done. With time to prepare for Wisconsin, I think UK is going to win. Now with Sam Decker going, if Sam Decker shoots like he did against Arizona, if the whole team shoots like they did against Arizona in the second half, I don't know if anybody can beat Wisconsin, because you just can't beat shooting if the shots are going in like that. Now UK's length is going to give trouble for Wisconsin. As long as they don't allow backdoor screens, UK should win this game by about, I'm going to say, 8 points. Now Duke is probably going to beat Michigan State, sadly. But the reason Duke is here, and the reason I'm continuing to pick Duke now, is that they have dramatically improved their defense from the regular season. I think some statistic had them at like the 92nd or 91st worst defense or best defense in the nation. 91st in the nation. Not very good defensively. But in the NCAA tournament, they've been like first or second, probably second behind Kentucky in defensive efficiency. Second. From 91st to second. That's just dramatic improvement. I don't know if Coach K was just saving the defense for the tournament. I don't know if he took a week to teach them how to play defense. I don't know what it is, but their defense is just dramatically improved. I did not see that coming, which is why I had Duke losing to I think Iowa State. Oh my God, why did I have Iowa State? But that's why I had Gonzaga beating Duke. I just did not think Duke was going to step it up defensively as much as they have. Credit to them for that. Defense wins championships. So I think Duke is going to beat Michigan State. Who knows, though? It's Tom Izzo. He's had time to prepare. Can Tom Izzo do anything to stop Okafor and the shooters outside? We'll see if he's got a game plan. We'll see. Maybe they'll just foul Okafor, who can't hit free throws, and they'll just keep fouling him until, he gives up. I don't know. So the championship game is Kentucky over Duke. I don't know how close the game will be, but what I'm really interested in, if Kentucky does play Duke in the final, is how many times will they reference Christian Laettner. I'm setting the over-under amount at 4.5. So I guess we'll start with tip-off. Once tip-off has started, how many times do they reference Laettner? Or do we want to do from when coverage starts? Because if it's when coverage starts, I've got to increase that. I'm going from tip-off. From tip-off to the end of the game, how many Christian Laettner references will be made? 4.5. If it's a close game, if it's tight at the end, if it goes into overtime, it'll go well above 4.5. Maybe the commentators decide, that's in the past. Let's not reference it. Let's only talk about this game. And they only mention it once or twice, maybe. If we count pregame and postgame, all the coverage going up, I'm thinking it would be closer to around 15 references. I'm hoping it's 0, but who knows how many times how many times they'll reference him if it's Kentucky and Duke. But I have Kentucky beating Duke. Kentucky's just the best team. They've got so much depth, so much length. They can guard Okafor. They can guard the shooters. If Duke gets in foul trouble, they have nobody to come in the game. Kentucky can throw 20 more bodies in there. If Okafor gets in foul trouble, either Okafor is going to get in foul trouble, which is going to hurt Duke, or he's going to choose not to foul, and Kentucky's just going to have their way in the paint. It's going to be one of those two things, and Kentucky's going to win. So let's go Big Blue. This has been the Free Culture Sports Show. Thank you for watching. We will be back next week, maybe talking about the finale, and maybe I won't be by myself next week. All right. Enjoy basketball.